What's up, guys, and welcome back to MacLeod versus the Movies, week 7. This is my movie a day challenge, I guess I've set myself. And this is the films I watched this week. We're going to jump straight into it because I don't think I have any housekeeping stuff to do. So we're going to jump straight into our first film. This is the film I watched on Sunday the 10th of February. I went to see Glass at the cinema, directed by M. Night Shyamalan from 2019. For our plot summary, after the events of Split and Unbreakable, all three characters of Glass, David and Kevin, are institutionalized in a psychiatric institution where they are treated for illusions of grandeur. Or delusions of grandeur, that should be. Going on to my pros now. Firstly, James McAvoy's performance again. He was the best thing in Split by being the main character of Split, but he was great in Split. He was great in this. He had more personas on screen again, which was my one kind of complaint. Well, one of my main complaints about Split was not getting to see enough of the personas. We get to see a lot more of them in this, even though he's a third of a three-man leading cast. So I was quite happy about seeing more of them. For my second pro, I thought some of the shots were pretty good. I quite liked how some things were filmed in it. There's a couple of really nice ones in this. And thirdly, I'll say Samuel L. Jackson's performance as well. He was really good at Unbreakable, but I really enjoyed him in this as well. It's easy to kind of lose sight of him because of how good James McAvoy is, but he's really, really good in this. Even though he's not involved much to begin with. Once he's a part of the plot, the film, I think, picks up quite a bit. On to my cons now. Some bits at times are a bit cringy. I hate using that term because it is such a overused term. But at certain points in this movie, I was nearly laughing at serious scenes. Because there's quite a few comedy scenes in this, or quite a few jokes. The jokes are quite funny in this, actually. But there's certain bits I'm like, ugh. Secondly, I disliked the ending. It didn't really work for me. The twist wasn't so good. Well, it has two kind of twists, which I'll get into, but neither of them worked that well for me. For my third con, continuing on from what I was just saying, I felt the first twist was extremely predictable. I thought this was just kind of already established as being a thing, and it's kind of revealed as a twist revelation, and I'm like, I thought that was obvious. Because, again, no spoilers, but it's kind of covered in Split, I think. There's a scene that makes sense if you put things together, so I don't see how it's a surprise. And for my last con, I'm going to say this, M. Night Shyamalan's cameo in this, I really didn't like it. I'll say, it made me roll my eyes a bit where I'm like, oh yeah, really? For my overall rating, I gave this a 6 out of 10. Do I think you should see this? Maybe if you've seen Unbreakable and Split. I keep wanting to say Glass. I keep wanting to think Split is the final one for some reason. But if you've seen Unbreakable and you've seen Split, probably see Glass. Wait till it's out on DVD and cheap. It's not worth going out your way to see, but it's alright. It's not as good as the ones that came before it, I don't think. So for my second film this week, I saw Can You Ever Forgive Me, again at the cinema, directed by Marielle Heller from 2018. For our plot summary, Lee Israel is a struggling author whose work has fallen out of favour. She turns to forging letters from famous authors to make money and slowly descends into a life of crime. For our pros, firstly, Richard E. Grant's performance. Everyone's talking about it. He's nominated for the Best Supporting Actor Oscar. He was nominated for the Best Supporting Actor BAFTA. He's great in this. He plays a really over-the-top, eccentric, kind of rogue, I guess. That's how I would describe him. He's just really fun. I love Richard E. Grant, to be honest. I love him in pretty much everything, but he's really good in this. He definitely deserves all the recognition he's getting. Not just for this film, but for every film he does, but he's really good in this. Secondly, I thought the story was actually really interesting. I hadn't heard of Lee Israel before, and damn, it's a really interesting story. Forging all these letters, how she slowly escalates from just forging them to getting more and more and more dodgy. When you get the real life update at the end of the film, where it's like, this is what happened after the movie in real life, and you're like, holy crap, because it tells you how many she forged, and it's a lot. But yeah, the story's really interesting. Thirdly, I'll say this as well, I quite like Melissa McCarthy in this. Melissa McCarthy's an interesting one, because she's in some really bad movies that I'm not keen on, and she's actually a really good actress when she does, more traditional acting rather than being in like comedies or that. This is kind of a comedy. It's funny than it being a comedy, I'd say. I know that sounds like the same thing, but to me a comedy is more aimed purely at comedy. But yeah, she's really good at this. She's quite likable, even though she's a character you wouldn't like her in real life, but as an on-screen character, you're kind of rooting for her, For my fourth point, I do think it is pretty humorous. It's a pretty funny movie. It's a lot of fun, actually. Some of the lines of dialogue are particularly funny. I don't go into examples or stuff like that, but it's a very fun film. For my cons, I've got a couple. I think the soundtrack is a little bit too loud in certain scenes. That could just be me personally, because I do tend to struggle to hear things when there's a lot of background noise. Can struggle to make out what's being said, so that might just be a personal thing. And secondly, it's maybe a little too long. Just a little. It's not too long a movie, it's like 1 hour 46. That's not really that long, but it just felt maybe just like 2 minutes. Or maybe not, maybe more than that, but I don't know what you would cut. So for my overall rating, I gave this an 8 out of 10. Do I think you should see it? Absolutely. I loved this. It was fun, the dialogue was fun, the acting's good. For my next film, I watched The Interview on Netflix, directed by Craig Monahan from 1998. It's not the Seth Rogen, James Franco, Kim Jong-un film. Or is it Kim Jong-il still at that point? I can't remember. It's not the North Korea film by them. This is a Australian movie with Hugo Weaving. So for our plot summary, a man is taken by police and interviewed about an unknown crime. I know that's incredibly vague, but that's all you're getting off me. For my pros, firstly, Hugo Weaving's performance. I keep mentioning people's specific performances this week, but Hugo Weaving does a very good job. So he's the possible criminal taken by the police, and throughout a good 80% of the movie, you're not entirely sure what way is the truth. Was he guilty? Is he not? And that's a very difficult thing to pull off, and Hugo Weaving does it well. And his character, morphs a lot as the movie progresses, and he does a really good job of doing that. This may shock you, Hugo Weaving's a good actor. Secondly, following on from that, we only really have 3 main characters in this. So we have Hugo Weaving, we've got the main police detective, played by Tony Martin, and then a second, kind of younger rookie police detective, played by Aaron Jeffrey. And those are basically the 3 characters in the movie. We do get some other ones, but that is the focal point of the whole movie, and all 3 of them do a really good job. They're really good performances, and it just makes for... It's impressive, that this film is basically carried by 3 people throughout the whole thing. Thirdly, I think this film is really well filmed, especially given that about 90% of it is in one location. There are a lot of nice camera movements going on. You get camera zooms in and out and over the table, and it's very well choreographed camera moves in a confined space basically around the table. It's very impressively done for such a, limited space. It's very well put together. And fourthly, I thought the story was interesting. I know I mentioned that in quite a few films as a pro, but if a movie's got an engaging story, I can look past technical things, I think. Because you want something that actually appeals, you want something that engages you. To me, the story is one of the most important things in a film. That's just my personal taste, but I think it's true for a lot of people. On to the cons now. I'm not keen on something specifically about the technical presentation of this. So there are transitions in between scenes in this. And only in certain scenes, where what we get is we basically get a fade almost to monochrome, but very black heavy monochrome. So basically only the really bright bits will be white, and then everything else is black. So it's, literally monochrome, no grey. And then that then fades out. And it kind of lingers on that monochrome thing. I don't get what they were going for with it. And it kind of annoyed me. I wasn't quite sure what they were going for. It just didn't look that good. And it's in it a few times. It's like, it's a bit strange. For my last con, I feel like the pacing's a little bit off at times in this movie. I feel like certain things happen too fast. This is like far into the plot, so I'm not going to go into them, but certain things kind of come out too fast, and I'm like, oh, it's okay. Then like it feels like it could have done with like a bit of a different edit. For my overall rating vote, I gave this a 7 out of 10. Do I think you should see it? Yeah, maybe. It's quite fun. If you've got like a hour and 45 minutes free, it's definitely worth a watch. It's definitely worth a watch if you like Hugo Weaving, because it was a very good performance by him. And just in general, if you're interested in films from other places, because I like watching films from other countries. I was going to say I've never watched an Australian film before, and I remembered Mad Max is Australian. I'm like, oh yeah, apart from, that series of films I really like. Apart from them, I've never watched a film from Australia. So this was quite a nice thing to see for a change. On Wednesday the 13th, I watched An Evening with Beverly, Luff, Lynn on Netflix, directed by Jim Hosking from 2018. For our plot summary, Lulu runs away from her home with Colin to see An Evening with Beverly, Luff, Lynn for one magical night only. I know that's not a particularly in-depth plot summary, but I think you're better going into this movie not knowing a lot about it. Because I did. And I was glad I didn't know much about it. On to the pros. Firstly, I really, really like the cast of this movie. So starting off, we've got Aubrey Plaza as Lulu, our main character. She's great. I love Aubrey Plaza. We've got Jermaine Clement, who's one of the Flight of the Conchords people. He was also in What We Do in the Shadows, which I also really enjoyed. We've got Matt Berry, who's one of my favourite UK comic actors. He's brilliant in everything. We've got Craig Robinson's in this as well. He plays the titular Beverly, Luff, Lynn. You might know him from Hot Tub Time Machine. Which is what career highlight. And I still got that to watch, actually. I might watch that soon. And he's also Doug Judy in Brooklyn Nine-Nine, and that's what I know him from, and I love him in Brooklyn Nine-Nine. So I was like, oh, this is going to be good. So the whole cast is great. Secondly, I really liked some of the subtle visual jokes in this. There's a lot of jokes in this that are just kind of in the background, or, the film doesn't need to bring your attention to them, but when you notice them, you're like, yeah, that's really good. Don't want to say what they are, but there's one in particular that really appealed to me and really made me laugh. And thirdly, for my last pro, I felt the final 2/3 of this are really, really funny. You can guess what one of the cons is going to be. But yeah, I thought this was a really funny movie the more I got into it. On to the cons now. This film probably isn't as good as the sum of its parts, because there are a lot of really talented people I really like in this. And the film is good, but it's not great. It doesn't feel like it really reaches its full potential, which is a shame, because it's almost there, and that's what makes it kind of heartbreaking. For my second con, I don't think the opening is as funny. I mentioned that. I don't think the film really gets funny until Jermaine Clement shows up, basically, as Colin. And it's not that Aubrey Plaza isn't funny, it's not that because the other characters are also funny once we're past that point. It's just the very beginning just doesn't seem to click with me as well. But once you've got Jermaine Clement there, it all picks up and I'm like, yes. Especially when it gets, and then it's kind of funny at the beginning, and then it really tracks up and stays up for the rest of the movie. So yeah, I'm not so keen on the beginning. And finally, as one of my cons, there's one character in particular, and I don't like him. I don't think he's funny. He's only in a few scenes, but every time he shows up, I'm like, oh, this guy again. And it just doesn't work for me. I feel like he's kind of one joke, and it's not a very funny joke, so I'm not keen on him. And that's about the only character I disliked in the movie. I'm not going to say who it is, because I don't want to taint your opinion. For my overall rating, I gave this a 7 out of 10. Do I think you should see it? Yes. I really enjoyed it. It's probably a bit too weird for some people. It's kind of weird. But I like things that are weird, because I'm weird. So I'm like, hey, this movie's like me if I was a movie. I mean, this movie does have a lot of Scottish stuff in there, because it's like a Scottish hotel they're staying at, so it does kind of fit in. Maybe this film is me as a film. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. I can't wait for my life to pick up when Jermaine Clement shows up. Right, on Thursday the 14th, on Valentine's Day, I watched The Bone Collector. Inadvertently picking a film which makes a really good innuendo. I watched it on Netflix, directed by Philip Noyce. I don't know how you pronounce that, it's like Noyce, so I'm presuming it's pronounced Noyce. It's from 1999. For a plot summary, a paraplegic forensic expert teams up with a patrol cop to solve a series of grisly murders. On to the pros. Now on to the cons. That's right, this movie didn't have a single positive about it. It's bad. So we're going to jump straight in. Firstly, for the first con, there's a whole list of them. It's very long. Get comfy. For the Bone Collector section. Firstly, this film is a terrible, terrible rip-off of Seven. Now, Seven came out in 1995. Even the director himself was like, oh yeah, they're going to just make this into a rip-off of Seven. And it shows. They really want this to be as good as Seven, and as popular as Seven. And it's not. For those who don't know, the David Fincher film Seven, you know, that movie, it's got a very unique visual style. It's very gritty and gross. Not gross, but you know, what's the phrase I'm looking for? Like, violent, I guess? It's not really violent, it's more the aftermath of violence, like gory, but not gory. I don't know. Graphic, maybe? I'm not quite sure what the right word is for that, but this film really wants to be like Seven. And it's based on a series of books, so I think they wanted this to be like, we can't make the Seven sequel, because we phoned up Morgan Freeman with the Psychic Seven sequel, and he turned us down. That's a real thing. That became a real movie, and Anthony Hopkins is in it. And it's actually not that bad. It's got Colin Farrell in it too. They're like, they basically act their way through this not very good movie. Anyway, back to the Bone Collector. I can't avoid the Bone Collector. I will never get enough of saying the phrase Bone Collector. Secondly, a technical thing right off the bat. There is horrible colouring in shots. So we have like a kind of, the shots have a blue tint when they're outside. This is right at the beginning in one particular part. The exterior is all blues, and it's orange inside Denzel Washington's house, because he's like in his bed. Can't move at all, okay? But they are to such extents of a part, and it's like Angelina Jolie and crew are in... I nearly called him the Bone Collector. Denzel Washington is the Bone Collector. He's not, but imagine if that was his title in the movie. But they're in Denzel Washington's flat, and then they leave and go outside. So you get Angelina Jolie with the orange filter on her, and then 5 seconds later she's outside, and she looks like a different person. She looks ill. The blue and the orange are so different, it looks like two different films edited together. You know? So it's like he's on the phone to her, so it's like they've taken a phone conversation from one movie and edited what they're talking about so they match, you know what I mean? Because you obviously only film one half of a phone conversation in a movie. I hate to break the illusion for you, but it's like they've just taken other footage from a different movie and put it in for the other half of the conversation. It's terrible. Thirdly, I think the plot is very predictable. I guess the killer about 20 minutes in, and it's very obvious, I think. It's not very well executed, this movie. Fourthly, the terrible dialogue and tonal shifts. So this movie seems to struggle with editing, I think is its problem. I feel like it was filmed one way and then was probably edited into the Seven ripoff. But we'll start with the dialogue. Denzel's dialogue, about half of it in the beginning of the movie, is basically him going, lol, I'm disabled. So it'll be things like him going like, oh, the chief's on the phone, he wants to know where you are, Denzel Washington. And he says, tell him I'm skiing. Get it? Because he can't ski, because he's disabled. And that happens, I'm not kidding, about 10 times at the beginning of the movie. And I'm like, I hate this movie. I was 10 minutes in and I was hating it. It was constant. It was like, oh, I'll tell him. And it's the same joke over and over again. I'm out for a run. You're like, ha 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 ha. That's really funny, Denzel. Oh, God. I like how I'm saying it like it's Denzel Washington's fault. For the tonal shifts, you'll get like, just like a lot of it doesn't make sense. I think it ties into. I'm going to talk about the editing later on, so I'll get into it then, probably in more depth. Oh God, this next con, I don't even want to say it out loud. There is a. Okay, so Denzel Washington's character can only has feeling in his head, his shoulder, and one finger on his hand. So, Angelina Jolie's character has what I can only describe as. I'll read you exactly what I've written in my notes. I've written, in quotations, hand sex scene. And I don't mean what you think I mean. What I mean is, so Denzel Washington, put your hand flat on a table, or something like that, then take your other hand, and the gap between your index finger and your middle finger, she rubs that along the one finger he can feel. Like it's like, you know, like, like, I don't have to explain the biology of it, but, oh my. And that's done as like it's acted like it's a really sexy scene, and you're like, oh my God, what is this movie? Oh, and there's two of them. She does it later on when in front of. I don't care so much about spoilers in this, but she does it again in front of a group of people. The first time it's just the two of them, and I'm like, what the hell are you doing? Oh God. Oh, okay. I'm so glad I got away from the hand sex scene. It's from an ex-con. This is an effects thing, but there is a terrible CGI rat in this movie. So all the murder victims are kind of left in what I would basically describe as, well, most of them, like the first ones are just a dead body, but after that they're all kind of in almost Saw trap things, but not as violent as Saw, where it's like, this guy in particular with the CGI rat, he's like, gets cut open in like a abandoned building where this giant railing the guy's set up. So a rat will come along, and then the end of the railing, the rat's right at his face. So then the CGI rat is on the ramp at the end of his face. He goes, yeah, at the camera, directly at the camera, and that's the rat, like, killing the guy, I guess. Oh God, I'm not a fan of this movie, if you can't tell. For our next con, we've got the really bad cameo scene in a bookshop. So there's a bit where Angelina Jolie, she's looking up a book, and she goes into a bookshop, and she opens the door, and there's a guy standing browsing books who's in the background, and by in the background I mean Angelina Jolie like almost brushes him as she's walking past. He is right smack in the middle of the scene. The camera lingers on him after Angelina Jolie walks away. And I was like, that's the writer of the book, isn't it? And I looked it up and I was wrong, because it's the director, which somehow makes it worse, in my opinion, because he gave himself that cameo. You know, if it was the writer, I'd be like, oh, that's fun, because he's in a bookshop looking at books, you know, like a writer would do. But no, it's the director. I was like, oh man. For my next con, I think the performances in this are actually pretty weak. And that really disappoints me, because Denzel Washington's a good actor. Angelina Jolie is like a pretty alright actress. And Queen Latifah's in this. She's probably the best actor in this. She's probably the best character in the whole movie. I wouldn't give this movie any pros just because of how bad it was and how much I hated it. Queen Latifah would be the only pro that I could possibly think of for this movie. It is terrible. And it somehow has a 6.7 out of 10 on IMDb. And I want to write to everyone who gave it a good review and ask what movie they watched, because this movie was terrible. For my next con, I've mentioned this before, but really, this whole film smacks of re-editing by the studio. So, you've got... I've kind of mentioned this, I kind of covered it already, I feel like they filmed this one way, and then the producer was like, my god, have you seen this picture 7? The kids love it. You gotta make it more like 7, god damn it. You're gonna be a big success in the motion pictures with the 7 ripoff we're gonna make instead. And it was terrible. So it's kind of got that, two styles of film that it's trying to be at the same time, and it doesn't work, So for my next con, I've got... This is one of my most hated things in any bad movie. And it's a cliche in all these bad movies, and you see it in quite a lot of those kind of things. The zoom and enhance photo thing. Where they zoom and enhance a photo, and somehow it magically gets higher quality when they zoom in. That happens in this movie. That's almost like a joke of having zoom and enhance, and he literally goes zoom enhance at one point. I was like, oh no. I don't like this movie. Compiling of that, we've got another really annoying technology thing. So they're talking on walkie-talkies because he's in the bed and she's at the murder site or whatever. These walkie-talkies that work underground in New York City. Now, walkie-talkies are all right, but there's a limit to how far they can go. And this is in 1999, this movie's made. You could struggle to get a mobile phone signal underground. And in New York City, the buildings are pretty tall. There is a lot above you, as well as you being underground. And she's not just like, I've just gone down the manhole and here I am. She's in weird boiler rooms with pipes everywhere and that. You're like, no way would you get a crystal clear signal. That's the thing as well. It's not distorted over it or anything. It is like Angelina Jolie's in the room with him and Denzel Washington's in the room with her. Yeah, it's not a very well thought out movie. As another con, this is one that really, really annoyed me. The red herrings in this movie are some of the most obvious I've ever seen. Because they're like, oh, this guy could be the killer. And at one point, we get a view of the killer and a very specific physical characteristic of them. And I mean very, very specific. And something that you would see on anyone. And none of the red herrings have that characteristic. So, I'll give you an example. Say, this is changing it to something else in case you somehow want to watch The Bone Collector. I don't know why I said that like that in that voice. Imagine if the main character, we saw the killer's forearm and he had a big tattoo of a dragon, and then the red herring doesn't have a big tattoo. You'd be like, well, it's not him then. And you'll never guess what? It's not the red herring, because he doesn't have that thing. Oh. For my next con, this again ties into the technology aspect. The voice command software on his bed functions perfectly in 1999. And it's not just him being like, bed up, bed down, bed, phone. He's saying things like, bed, phone, Solansky or something like that, where it's a weird name, and you're like, no way would a voice recognition thing in 1999 recognize you saying that. No way. And it always works perfectly first time, because I thought, is this setting up to later on he's gonna get, he's gonna be like, oh, I need to phone Angelina Jolie quickly because the killer's about to get her, and he's gonna be like, phone Angelina Jolie, and it's gonna be like, phone Angelica Jolie or something like that, and you're going to be like, oh, he's not going to be able to get the computer to respond. Nope, works perfectly every time. For my overall rating for this movie, I gave it a 2 out of 10, which I think is quite generous. The reason I'm giving this a 2 out of 10 is 1 point is basically Queen Latifah, and the other point is that the sets aren't terrible. That's the only positives I can say about this. You know, on a technical level, it is a movie. It is a movie. Everything else, I hated it. Do I think you should watch this? No. It's not even enjoyably bad. It's just bad. Is it? I genuinely hated this. On the 15th, I watched Hard 8 on Netflix, directed by Paul Thomas Anderson in 1997. For our plot summary, we follow Sydney, a veteran gambler, and his young protege John as they live life in Reno and Vegas. A bit of a vague plot summary, but I don't want to give too much away because it's quite an enjoyable little movie actually. For my pros, Philip Baker Hall, who is the main character of Sydney, gives a really good performance in this. His character almost reminds me of a Winston Wolfe in Pulp Fiction, that kind of character. He's really good and he's really entertaining for the whole movie. Not entertaining is maybe not the right word, but really interesting. For my second pro, I think the cast as a whole is really decent, and if I was going to say decent, it's really strong actually, I think. So you've got John C. Reilly, who's an actor I really like. We've got Samuel L. Jackson, who's one of my favourites. We've got Gwyneth Paltrow. And in one scene, we've got 12-year-old Philip Seymour Hoffman. He's really good in the one scene as well. You're like, hey, good for you, Phil. So yeah, it's a really good a really good cast, and it's a really well-acted movie. For my last pro, there's some really nice cinematography in this. Certain shots are framed really well. You can tell it's not like a super high-budget film, but some shots in particular are really nicely filmed, and it shows the talent of the people making it really well. For my cons, this is probably just a personal thing. I don't feel like much happens in it. This movie's 1 hour 42. If I was to actually give a synopsis of the plot, actually what happens bit by bit, I feel like I could maybe do it in about 4 sentences. There's not really too much to the plot. You can kind of get away with that because the characters are quite strong, but personally, I felt like there wasn't just enough going on. I feel like there's a lot of, just not much happening. The things that do happen then, as a result, kind of have more of an impact. So maybe that's intentional, to show things are kind of uneventful until the events happen. For my overall rating, I gave it a 7 out of 10. Do I think you should watch it? Yeah, if you kind of like noirs and that kind of thing. It's quite a fun movie, it's quite interesting. It's probably worth a watch. I wouldn't look too much into it if I were you. It's fun not knowing much about it. Because I didn't know much about it. I went in quite blind and I really enjoyed it. And finally, on Saturday, I watched House Shark on Amazon Prime, directed by the amazingly named Ron Bonk. That sounds like a name from a Carry On film. That can't be a real person. But it is, apparently. Because half the credits are the extended Bonk family. His son appears as... I assume it's his son. But Nathan Bonk appears as the son of the main character in this, for example. This movie came out in 2018 or 2017, depending on who you believe. For a plot summary, a man's house is taken over by a terrestrial shark in this Jaws parody. So when I say parody, it is pretty much a point-for-point parody of Jaws. So, if you've seen Jaws, you know the plot of House Shark. For my pros, there are some surprisingly good effects in this. In particular, there's a toilet, and it's pretty surprisingly good. I was like, whoa, that's kind of impressive for this movie. I wasn't expecting something like that. And what's the other one that's really good? There's a second effect that's really good, and I can't remember what it was. I remembered. It wasn't necessarily a really good effect, but I was slightly impressed by how they got there's an underwater section in this movie, and they knew how to film underwater scenes without actually being underwater, and that impressed me. Less so the fact that you could see the actors were just standing and they were pretending to swim in the underwater segments, and you could see their feet on the floor and they're like, oh, I'm swimming, I'm doing the swimming hands. On to the cons now. It's not very funny. That's the first big problem with it. This is definitely intended to be a comedy, and bad comedies are my least favourite type of movie. Most of the jokes in this are really crass and quite vulgar. There's a lot of kind of dodgy homophobic stuff in it as well that made me kind of uncomfortable. There's a lot of like gay slurs getting thrown about, and you're like, oh, this movie's from 2017, not 1998. Not it was acceptable in 1998, but still, you're like, oh god, don't. For my next con, I mentioned a couple of the effects being good to decent. The vast majority of them are absolute crap. Highlights include the big rubber shark that plays the house shark. He's kind of charming, actually, the big rubber shark. He's so crap, he kind of, makes you smile a bit. Most of the other effects are just terrible, and we have some really dodgy makeup in this movie. For my next con, there's a nude scene in this with a lady. It's just kind of depressing and very unnecessary. And it's what kind of colours my opinion of this movie. Because if this movie was slightly different, it would be charming. Kind of like that way Manos is charming. And instead, you kind of go, this feels kind of sleazy, and it feels sleazy and also kind of, what's the phrase I'm looking for, like cynical, because on one hand it looks like, oh, it's a bunch of mates who've got a camera and they filmed dumb shark movie, but that nude scene, no one would do a nude scene for their mate's movie, I don't think, especially not the type of nude scene it is. It's it's that scene that's in like all those horror movies where it's like, oh, I shall get naked now for reasons. I mean, this character, the plot justification's so slim. This character gets naked to use the toilet. What? And she starts by taking off her top. And I'm like, why are you doing that to use the toilet? It's not how that works. For my next con, there's a lot of just very strange technical faults in this movie. So, for example, straight off the bat, we have the 180 degree rule is this thing in filmmaking where if you're filming a conversation between two people, you kind of stick the camera within a 180 degree field. So you're not switching what side characters are on. So say you're watching Mr. A talk to Mr. B, A is on the left, B is on the right. If you cut to our camera angle, you keep A on the left and B on the right. Because otherwise, it gets a bit confusing for people. Because you're trying to reorient yourself in a fictional space, 3D space in your mind. This movie breaks that rule in the first scene. And you can break it. It's not like something where you have to keep it. But usually you're breaking it for a reason. And this movie just does it. Because why not? And it's not like an obscure thing where it's like, oh, they didn't focus the camera properly, because you'd have to kind of learn how to do that. I once got a free little pamphlet thing that my uncle had got in his paper that was about filmmaking. Meant is like here's like how films are made. The 180 degree rule was on page 3 of that. It is a very basic thing for making movies. And I was like, wow, in the first scene. Following that, for my next con, we've got the terrible acting, as you would expect from a movie called House Shark. In particular, the Quint character of this is a guy who I think is trying to be like Jim Carrey, or Jim Carrey, depending on how you pronounce it. I don't know how you actually pronounce his name, I just realized I have no idea. But he's trying to be like, oh, and like doing silly voices and doing a weird face thing, and it doesn't work. It's not funny. and his voice is all over the place. At one point, he gets a bit Sean Connery, so he's like, "We have to stop a shock." I can't do a Sean Connery, that was awful. Like that, and it's really bad. For my next con, this movie is far too long. It is 1 hour and 51 minutes long. For this dumb parody Jaws house shark movie, it is 2 hours long. I had to take a lot of breaks to get through this movie. It was really bad. I was actually considering giving it a negative number. That's how much I disliked it. I'm sticking to my scale, so you can guess what I got. And finally, the presentation in this movie is bizarre. We get these... There's only about 6 of them in the movie, but we get these random... Like, the scene ends, and we cut to social media from the characters. It's like a screenshot of, like, fake Twitter.png, and, like, that kind of zooms around the screen, a completely flat image, and then we cut to the next thing. It's the strangest thing I've seen done in a movie like this. It's strange. I don't know what they were going for. So for my overall rating, unsurprisingly, this gets a 0 out of 10. Do I think you should watch it? No. It's really bad. It's so bad, you might have noticed this isn't as in-depth as some of my other bad movie discussions I've done. I'm actually seriously considering... I might see how people feel about it. I want to do a proper, like, full review video only on House Shark. Because there's a lot to talk about in this movie. I didn't even mention the kind of Native American character. Oh boy, that's a bit... Oh, he has mystical powers because he's Native American. Ugh. I don't know if they're making a joke about that stereotype in movies, or if they're just doing that, you know? Like, if they're doing the stereotype, or if they're making fun of the stereotype. I can't tell, and that's a bad thing. So I'd like to do a full video on this movie. If you'd like to see that, please let me know in the comments. I know you're probably wondering, well, Mild, what are you watching on Sunday the 17th of February? I'll tell you what I'm watching. I'm watching Carlito's Way on DVD. I'm excited about seeing that. Love Al Pacino. Love crime movies. Hopefully I'm going to have a good time with it. For my film of the week, I have to pick a movie of the week. It's got to be Can You Ever Forgive Me? This week, not so strong as some of my other weeks, I don't think, so far. But Can You Ever Forgive Me was a good movie. It would be in the movie of the week discussion, no matter what week I put it in. But it's a clear winner, I think, this week. So, if you'd like to give me some feedback, you can leave comments. If you want to see a full, in-depth dissection of House Shark, I'll be more than happy to make that. The more I think about it, the more I want to make it, because I want to try making like a proper thing just about one movie. I think that would be fun to do. And House Shark is prime material for it. To be honest, all the Amazon Prime movies kind of are. Prime is the best place for bad movies, I think. If you enjoyed this episode, you can leave a like. If you want to see other stuff I do, you can subscribe. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye. The Bone Collector.